I had the privilege to visit the Maghreb, North Africa. I went to Tangier, Morocco, where literally the Mediterranean Sea meets the Atlantic Ocean. Tangier is an ancient city, upwards of 3,000 years old, a crossroads of civilizations. Some parts of the city have not changed much over the past hundreds of years, especially the ancient Medina. I had a special reason for going to Tangier, to learn more about the world's most famous tangerine. No, not this one. Some of you may not know that people from Tangiers have historically been called tangerines. I said the world's most famous tangerine. So let's put this hypothesis to the test. Raise your hands if you've ever heard of Marco Polo. Anybody? Yeah, it looks like 100%. How about Christopher Columbus? Raise your hands. 100%. Maybe Vasco da Gama. Raise your hands. All right, 95%. Sir Francis Drake, 95%. Clearly, these are well-known explorers. Now raise your hand if you've heard of Shamsuddin Abu Abdullah Muhammad ibn Abdullah ibn Muhammad ibn Ibrahim ibn Muhammad ibn Yusuf al-Lawati at-Tanji. I see one hand, two hands. Okay, good. Bravo alaikum. Maybe you know him by his nickname, Ibn Batouta. Okay, now we're seeing some hands. Ibn Batouta is widely regarded as the most prodigious traveler in pre-modern history. He traveled about 75,000 miles. That's 5 times more than Marco Polo. And he began 167 years before Columbus set sail for the New World. In fact, Ibn Battuta traveled the same distance as Columbus, Marco Polo, and Vasco da Gama combined. And Sir Francis Drake, who's credited for circumnavigating the globe 250 years later, only traveled 2/3 the distance of Ibn Battuta. But unlike those other explorers, Ibn Battuta traveled primarily overland, not by ship, through some of the world's most unforgiving terrain. And unlike traveling by ship, Ibn Battuta's terrestrial experience allowed him to directly interact with the peoples and cultures of the world. Ibn Battuta was born in 1304 at the turn of the 14th century. He began traveling on June 14th, 1325. That's right. In a couple of months, it will be exactly 700 years since he started his journeys. He left Tangier at the tender age of 21 years old to perform a Hajj pilgrimage to Mecca, a journey that would normally take about a year and a half. But somewhere along the way, he was bitten by the travel bug, and probably some other bugs too. He would not return home to Morocco for another 24 years. Think about that for a moment. When life expectancy in those days was 30 to 35 years, hitting the road for 24 years is truly extraordinary. And how difficult it must have been for him and his family to say goodbye, knowing that they might never see each other again. As he said in his memories, "I set out alone, having neither fellow traveler in whose companionship I might find cheer, nor caravan whose part I might join. I forsook my home as birds forsake their nests, my parents being yet in the bonds of life, it weighed sorely upon me to part from them, and both they and I were afflicted with sorrow at this separation. Sure enough, his parents passed away while he was traveling, so they never had an opportunity really to say goodbye. Can you imagine? When I was 18, a buddy and I backpacked across Europe for 3 months. This was way before internet and cell phones, and it was possible to communicate with home, but it was crazy expensive to make an international call. If you did, you had to make sure it was pretty short, like, "Hi, Mom, send cash, bye." Of course, I expected to see my parents when I got home, and alhamdulillah, I did. We don't know if Ibn Battuta communicated with his parents while he was on the road, but it's unlikely that he did so because he kept no diary. Wait, did I really say that this guy traveled the earth for 30 years and he never kept a travelogue? That's right. As astonishing as that may sound, it reflects on the importance of oral traditions in the Islamic world and other ancient cultures, both then and now. When he left Tangier, Ibn Battuta had no companions with whom to travel. He was all alone. In later years, he was credited with creating this Arab adage, "Al-Rafiq qabl at-tariq." First the companion, then the route. Choosing a reliable companion in those days in harrowing conditions crossing the deserts of Middle East and North Africa could easily spell the difference between life and death. Think about the dangers that one might encounter. Harsh environments, a dearth of potable water, and unfriendly and often poisonous wildlife. Not to mention brigands, pirates, and all manner of thieves and highwaymen. To survive, a traveler had to rely upon the integrity, security, and generosity of others, especially his companions. And there were so many diseases for which there were no cures. For example, Ibn Battuta's travels overlapped with the Black Death, bubonic plague, from 1347 to 1351. Major cities were decimated, and in fact, 1/3 of the population of the Middle East perished. Europe was no safer. An estimated 50% of the population of Europe died from the Black Death. During the golden age of Islamic science, medicine in the Middle East was more advanced than that of medieval Europe, where they were still drilling holes in people's head to let the evil spirits out. Just in case you get that question the next time you play Trivial Pursuit, that process is called trepanation. We don't know what kind of medical treatments Ibn Battuta had on his travels, but at least he was in the right part of the world for the best possible care. As he crossed continents, Ibn Battuta had at least 3 things going for him. First, the rules of hospitality in Dar al-Islam, the Islamic world, were well defined based on travels over the millennia. So even in the harshest conditions, he could count on the host's honor, generosity, and respect. Number 2, Ibn Battuta came from a family of Islamic legal scholars, qadis, which gave him a certain authority. He used this authority and knowledge wherever he traveled, giving guidance and advice to leaders far and wide. And number 3, in the 14th century, the Arabic language was a lingua franca, understood throughout much of the known world. Christopher Columbus, for example, is said to have a working knowledge of Arabic. And he had to, because in those days, it was the Arab voyagers and scientists who created so much expertise about voyage, starting with the invention of the astrolabe, which guided travelers for hundreds of years. So even when he went outside the Middle East and North Africa, Ibn Battuta could communicate to a large extent in Arabic, whether in sub-Saharan Africa or the Indian subcontinent or Southeast Asia. And as some of you know, as you probably noticed, he reached China in 1345, reaching what is known today as Beijing. When Ibn Battuta finally came home to Morocco, the ruler commissioned him to record his travels. His account was called A Gift to Those Who Contemplate the Wonders of Cities and the Marvels of Traveling. But throughout most of history, Ibn Battuta's book has simply been known as Ar-Rihla, the journey. Like many of you here, I've been blessed to travel the world. I've visited about 150 countries, alhamdulillah. But my travels have been way easier than those of Ibn Battuta, and far less important from a historical standpoint. Tongue-in-cheek, just for fun, sometimes people refer to me as Ibn Battuta, which I consider to be a great compliment. A few months ago, for example, I flew on a commercial aircraft that broke the sound barrier. Thank you, Boeing, and thank you, Mother Nature. My supersonic flight traveled 800 miles in 1 hour. Now imagine how challenging it was for Ibn Battuta to travel 800 miles, and you'll understand why I am humbled and in awe of this man. He traveled upwards of 75,000 miles, facing some of the toughest terrain on earth, and he visited the equivalent of 40 present-day countries. That's a remarkable achievement unto itself. But let us not overlook the important role that Ibn Battuta played in spreading Arab and Islamic culture, community by community. Imagine the stories that he must have told and the insights that he must have shared as he made his travels all over the world. Some of this, of course, is lost to history, but it's clear that he played a singular role in promoting governance, jurisprudence, science, culture, navigation, and a thoughtful interpretation of Islam. In a sense, he was North Africa's first ambassador, an emissary who carried a message of tolerance and respect far and wide. And I say that recognizing that we have some extraordinary North African ambassadors with us here tonight. Ibn Battuta returned home to Tangier in 1354, where he lived out his days as an Islamic scholar until his death, apparently in 1369, at the ripe old age of 65. The Ibn Battuta Museum in Tangier has carefully curated his travels. I extend my thanks to the museum, especially Madame Al-Hanash, who helped to make today's presentation possible. She provided the moving map, and the photos, well, those came from me. If you go to Tangier, you need to visit the museum. In addition, I encourage you to visit Ibn Battuta's mausoleum. His tomb may be found in his tidy, modest birthplace. Honoring one of the greatest travelers of all time, the mausoleum is remarkably unassuming, understated, and respectful. An elderly sheikh who has lost his sight takes care of the premises. The sign on the door says, Ana huna, I'm here, please knock. The tomb doesn't get too many visitors these days, the sheikh told me, and most of these are on a pilgrimage, like myself. It's a very peaceful spot, away from the hustle and bustle of Tangier, a fitting place to rest for a peripatetic traveler who covered much of the known world in the course of 3 decades. In his final years, Ibn Battuta himself put it best. He said, traveling leaves you speechless, then it turns you into a storyteller. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for giving me the opportunity to be your storyteller tonight. Assalamu alaikum.